Hello, I'm Dr. Jennifer Craig-Norton, and I'd like to welcome you to this course on complicating the narratives of the Kindertransport. In this short lecture, I'd like to follow on from the video of Nicholas Winton, which you hopefully have viewed, and introduce you to some of the ways in which the Kindertransport narrative might be reassessed and reconsidered. It is almost impossible to watch clips from the 1988 That's Life program featuring Nicholas Winton and not be moved when it's revealed that many in the audience were those he had helped bring over from Czechoslovakia as children in 1939. The inescapable themes of this program are rescue and salvation. The children saved by a kindly stranger whom they are meeting for the first time 50 years after their rescue from certain death, according to the program's presenter. Nicholas Winton, already an elderly man by the time That's Life aired, lived another 27 years, during which time his legend as a Holocaust hero and rescuer grew exponentially. He was knighted by the Queen in 2003, honored by the Czech and Slovak governments, was the subject of a number of films and books and the focus of several memorials and commemorative efforts during his lifetime, such as the dedication of this statue in his hometown rail station, seen here, being dedicated by then Home Secretary Theresa May. Dubbed Britain's Schindler, Nicholas Winton became the living embodiment of the rescue narrative of the Kindertransport. This narrative was first expounded in 1944 in a small pamphlet entitled A Great Adventure, the Story of the Refugee Children's Movement. The paragraph quoted here is the final paragraph of the pamphlet and is probably the most oft quoted of all lines in Kindertransport literature. It emphasizes the heroic efforts of the refugee organization, and by extension, the British nation, in rescuing 10,000 children and offering them the opportunity of salvation in a, quote, decent, normal atmosphere, and suggests that these rescued children would all grow up to be happy and free. This suggestion that the Kindertransport provided a happily ever after story was endorsed 12 years later in the book They Found Refuge, a retrospective history of the Jewish Refugees Committee, written by one of its principals. The book included an essay by Lord Gorrell, the former chairman of the Refugee Children's Movement and the man whom Parliament had appointed to be the legal guardian of the minor kinder who had been orphaned by the war and Holocaust. In this quote from his essay, Lord Gorrell promulgates the idea that not only did the kinder grow up to, quote, work, play, laugh, and be happy, he believed that hardly one failed to make good. Here, Gorrell also lauds the efforts of the refugee organizations and the British people who took the children in, claiming it was a magnificent achievement and remains the finest of memories. The notion that the kinder all achieved happy, successful lives was certainly perpetuated in Nicholas Winton's That's Life program, notably in revealing that one of the women seated next to him was Lady Milena Grenfell-Baines, the former Milena Fleischmann, a Kindertransportee from Prague, now a titled aristocrat. The rescue narrative has proved so durable and unassailable that in 2015, the late Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, when speaking about the Syrian refugee crisis, distilled the Kindertransport down to a simple humanitarian gesture that lit a light in the darkest period of history. While elements of humanitarianism, rescue, success, and happiness are all undoubtedly part of the Kindertransport story, they are not the whole story. And it is our hope that as we delve more deeply into case studies and discussions, this course will challenge and interrogate this celebratory narrative. For the remainder of this introduction, I would like to counter a few of the mythologies that have been perpetuated by the legend of Nicholas Winton and exposed the contradictions that undercut the idea that the Kindertransport was merely a simple humanitarian gesture. Nicholas Winton always maintained that his role in the Kindertransport was quite modest in the larger scheme of things, and this was not merely false modesty. Although getting nearly 700 children placed in the UK was no small feat, as these pages from his famous scrapbook attest, the fact remains that after he had done so, he took no part in their aftercare and did not continue in his refugee work once the war began. Compared to others who devoted themselves throughout the war to the support, guidance, and maintenance of unaccompanied refugee children, his role was indeed a limited one. And yet, such was his renown that a Sunday Times headline in May 2019 credited him quite erroneously with being the founder of the Kindertransport. One of the most dramatic commemorations that took place in Winton's lifetime was a performative event known as the Winton Train, which reenacted one of the Prague children's transports on the 70th anniversary of the Kindertransport in September 2009. At the start of the Winton Train, a statue of Winton was unveiled at the Prague railway station. It was based on the most iconic photograph of Winton, holding a little boy named Hansi Neumann. Here's a very good example of the blurring of lines between a valorizing legend and reality. The photo was not taken at a railway station, but at an airfield, as Winton was seeing off the first of 25 children from Prague who left by plane, not train, and were the only children to leave during his brief stay in Czechoslovakia. These children were sponsored by the Barbican Mission to the Jews, whose aim in taking unaccompanied Jewish refugee children was explicitly conversionary, a fact that at the time Winton had serious misgivings about, as he expressed in his report written shortly after his return to London in January 1939. He noted that these children were brought out under conditions which were not acceptable to large sections of the British public, insofar that an undertaking had to be given that if they were Jewish, they should be baptized. In the event, his fears were not unfounded, as the story of one of these children, Ilse Stein, pictured here with little Hansi and another child at the Prague airport, attests. This program about Ilse's life, broadcast on BBC Radio 4, noted that Ilse was very lucky because her mother had come on a domestic permit a couple of months after she left, but that Ilse didn't get to see her often. The Barbican Mission continued to proselytize, and Ilse fell for it hook, line, and sinker because she loved its certainty. Her mother was once refused access to Ilse on a rare afternoon off because Ilse was involved in a prayer meeting. This is only one instance in which Winton's efforts intersected with one of the most enduring controversies of the Kindertransport, the estrangement of Jewish children from their religion and Jewish heritage by their placement in non-Jewish and frequently proselytizing settings. Much later, after Nicholas Winton had become famous, he recalled his response to the criticism he had received at the time from Jewish religious leaders who objected to his placing children with the Barbican Mission, the Christadelphians, and other Christian sects. He said, "I took no notice of their objections. It may seem terrible from the Jewish point of view, but on the other hand, the children are alive. I was after saving lives, not souls. I told them, I've got my work to do, you've got yours. If you prefer a dead Jew to a proselytized one, that's your business." In framing the issue this way, Winton failed to acknowledge the possibility that both the refugee children's lives and souls might have been saved, and privileged the idea that saving lives was of paramount importance, no matter what traumas the children experienced and how those lives turned out. Winton also tellingly ignored the reality that many parents expressly wished and expected that the children they were so reluctantly parting with would be raised to value their religious heritage. In this excerpt from a letter written by a parent to the Polish Jewish Refugee Fund, it is clear that many of them did want their children to remain in Jewish settings. Simon Klarman wrote, "My dearest wish is that my children can grow into happy and fearless people who are glad we are Jews and proud of their Jewishness. My heart weeps at the thought that I am not to be blessed to have my children around me, to bring them up and speak with them. I am only doing this because it is a bitter necessity." The emphasis on rescue and salvation and the valorization of people such as Nicholas Winton as a rescuer, as a British Schindler, has tended to suppress the critical examination of issues such as religion and conversion, and any consideration of the parents' hopes for their children beyond saving their lives. It has also led to a number of misconceptions about the Kindertransport and obscured other ways of understanding and assessing the program. One of these misunderstandings has to do with the role of the British government. On the 21st of November, 1938, the Home Secretary, Sir Samuel Hoare, announced the government's willingness to allow the entry of unaccompanied refugee children under the age of 17 into the UK. Far from being a government-sponsored program, this quote from his very short speech shows that he envisions the government's role as extremely limited, saying it will only probably be necessary for the Home Office to give the necessary visas and facilitate their entry into this country. Their maintenance, their aftercare, all the logistics of bringing them to the UK, all would be undertaken by voluntary agencies, and no government resources, financial or otherwise, would be expended on these efforts. In the same speech, Sir Samuel Hoare also mentioned the parents, noting, "I could not help thinking what a terrible dilemma it was to the Jewish parents in Germany to have to choose between sending their children to a foreign country into the unknown and continuing to live in the terrible conditions to which they are now reduced in Germany." Quite tellingly, he avoided acknowledging that the parents and siblings not accepted on the Kindertransport would continue to live in those terrible conditions to which they were now reduced. Nor did he admit that the terrible dilemma facing the Jewish parents was created by the British government's decision to allow only the children and not their families into the UK. There is virtually no visual record of the thousands of partings Kindertransport families endured between December 1938 and September 1939, save the short film taken at the Prague airport in late January 1939 as those 25 children were being seen off by their parents and loved ones. These stills, taken from that footage, clearly show the anguish of both parents and children as the Kinder were sent away into the unknown, anguish that has been recalled in countless testimonies and memoirs. These images are not easy to reconcile with the celebratory and triumphant narratives of rescue and salvation, and they challenge us to look at the Kindertransport through a different lens. For while it is true that 10,000 children were rescued, the Kindertransport was also, at its very foundation, a deliberative family separation scheme. And if we view the Kindertransport through this very different interpretive lens, it becomes imperative to examine the ways in which family separation affected every aspect of Kindertransportees' lives. They were forced to rely on their foster carers or the matrons and masters of their hostels and the refugee agencies to act as substitute parents, often with very dire results. Many children were estranged from their religious heritage. There were serious limitations on their education and their ability to pursue professional careers to which many aspired. Many were separated from and lacked contact between their siblings who had also come on the Kindertransport, and those whose parents were in the country, often as domestic servants, were likewise separated. for long periods of time with very little contact. Kinder all harbored fears about their loved ones. Most experienced some level of homesickness and loneliness, often being abandoned by the carers who had originally taken them in, or feeling, especially the young ones, abandoned by their own parents. Many lost their language and endured conflicts of identity as they tried to fit in a country that was at war with their original homeland. We know that the majority of Kinder lost their families, and it is likely only 2,000 or 3,000 of those 10,000 were ever reunited with one or more parent. And for those that survived, many faced very difficult reunions after being separated for many years, 6, 7, 8, sometimes even 10 years. It is our aim here over the next 3 weeks to explore these issues through case studies and discussions, to complicate the simple narratives that have grown up around the Kindertransport, and to challenge you to think critically about the lived experiences of Kindertransportees and the legacies of family separation and the Kindertransport.